so happy Tech Week. I appreciate you coming out and meeting with us and our founders and our experts. And yeah, this is Makundo Studio. So this is a local yoga studio in the Bay Area. When setting this up, I wanted to make sure that we were supporting a local business. And so they were gracious enough to help us out. So my name is Ashley Kozak. I am a fellow of the Open Lunar Foundation. And I've been developing a position navigation timing card with them. And one of the tasks at hand for me was to try to get the word out a little bit more about building lunar solutions out here in the space. So when A16 was putting on Tech Week, I just thought that this would be a really nice breath of fresh air compared to talking about AI. There's been a lot of AI events, and so not many space events, and so I wanted to make sure that I gave you guys a platform to talk about these things too. So welcome to the Alternative Space Solutions panel. I'm thrilled to be joined by some of our founders. The reason why I thought that this might be helpful was because in 1972, this sort of marked the beginning of the American Space Shuttle program, and this was a huge boom for that industry. NASA, they were funding different manufacturers across the country in order to build the components that would go on these shuttles. And this was a major chapter of development for the space industry. In 2011, when I was living in Cape Canaveral, I learned from the locals about what it meant for the space shuttle industry to have, or the space shuttle program to have closed up. And this turned into a sort of economic downturn that was revitalized by these major companies like SpaceX, like Blue Origin, like Relativity and Firefly. And so we're sort of in a new chapter again for space, where we're seeing these major titans of the industry establish their foothold. And when putting together a panel about this, I wanted to give a platform for new founders who are entering an industry that does have this establishment now. And so that brings us here today. I want to talk to some founders who have that optimism, the grit, and that enthusiasm to develop in this space. So, I'm excited to be joined by Abhishek Tripathi. He is the Director of Mission Operations at UC Berkeley. He has over 20 years experience in human and robotic spaceflight at NASA and at SpaceX. We've got Gulmohar Ahluwalia, who is the founder and CEO of Nyxara. She is pioneering the next generation of optical laser communication systems that radically increase data throughput while reducing deployment costs. And then we've got Paolo, Pino, who is the CTO and co-founder of Volta Space Technologies, which is developing breakthrough power or optical power beaming from lunar orbit. He was also a fellow of the Open Lunar Foundation, which is how we met. And I'm going to kick it off there. I invite you guys to introduce yourselves if you would like to start. We'll just go down the line, and anything that I left out, please feel free to mention.
First of all, actually, you've just done an amazing job setting all this up, and thank you for doing that, and those were great introductions. More to add, I have a background in electrical telecoms engineering, and coming from a telco background, that's where my journey into space began, because to get data across the Earth is the same challenge that you have in space, which is how do you get high-speed data from space to Earth? And if you can't do that, then you can't build anything in the lunar economy or on the Martian economy. So that is one of the key pieces I believe we need to solve as humanity if we're going to go beyond the cosmos and go beyond Earth. Because you don't want to wait 2 hours to receive a phone call from the lunar base. That's how you should be thinking about it. And we see a big proliferation in interest in being able to put things on the lunar surface, whether it's from foreign actors or it's here in the US. It also becomes a national security risk. So those are the two things that converge to really uplift the amount of investment that is going in the space, and I'm sure we'll talk about that later. But yeah, that's my background and my primary interest in being able to build this and bring it to market.
Yeah, my name's Abhishek Tripathi. Like Ashley said, the Director of Mission Operations at the UC Berkeley Space Sciences Lab. Ashley, thank you again. I totally resonate with you wanting to make sure there was an aerospace event here, not just AI, so I appreciate that. So a little bit of my background. I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm also a micropaleontologist. I wanted to find life on Mars, so did a little bit of both. Right now, in addition to being the director of mission operations, I'm also the air and space track chair for Berkeley Skydeck. So I see lots of folks that are trying out ideas for new space companies. Always glad to see that. Always glad to give feedback. I advise a couple companies. One of them being K2 Space, another one being a space manufacturing company called Ambrosia. So I'm really excited about what we have in front of us in terms of both the lunar economy and then later Mars. At Berkeley, we currently operate 2 spacecraft, the Themis Artemis mission. It's a constellation of 5 satellites, but 2 of them are in orbit around the moon. 2 weeks ago, we launched Carruthers, which is about 1 million miles out now, and we're in contact with it through DSN. And 4 weeks from now, we're launching the Escapade mission, which are twin spacecraft to Mars. So I think, we're right at the dawn of needing to figure out how are we going to communicate with all these spacecraft, how are we going to provide power to these spacecraft. So I think now is an exciting time to really think about the lunar economy, the near Earth economy, the lunar economy, and then eventually the Mars economy as well.
No way I can beat that. Hello everyone, my name is Paolo, co-founder, CTO of Volta Space. My background in space systems engineering. Spent some of my time training at the European Space Agency. I was working on a lunar exploration mission for the extraction of water ice from the south pole of the moon. And it was very hard to have those systems becoming able to survive the extreme temperatures. And so when the interest in the moon exploration came up a little bit, it became pretty timely to develop solutions to provide power to those missions and enable all those great applications. And that's what's prompting Volta to build some power beaming systems. And I was also part of the Open Lunar team. I was working on power standards. That was my, on the moon, that was my branch back then, and that's how I met Ashley, which I thank you again for having us today.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for flying from Montreal to join us. I'm literally so honored that someone would do that. So, awesome. Well, let's jump into it then. I wanted to ask Paolo and Gulmohar about sort of, this is a new era. We're seeing a lot of change, and we do have these major industry players already established now within the space industry. So my question to you guys is, where do you start? How do you start? Whoever wants to go first.
Okay.
How do you start? So how do you start a new company in this day and age? That's essentially what we're doing, and we were very intentional about it. And yes, there has been major investment in this space because we've had companies like Starlink, SpaceX, and Rocket Lab succeed, and those are the 2 huge players that it really pushed me back in Australia to prompt a move to the US and do this. And one of the things that we learned pretty early on is we had to move locations to access the kind of capital that would be needed for this type of a project. And being able to understand how much capital does a manufacturing high-tech, deep-tech project takes is something everyone needs to understand. And typically a lot of the founders in this space tend to be very technical. They come from a scientific background, and it's very hard to teach scientists how to think in a way that is more business-like. How do you de-risk the technology, and how do you essentially make returns, or you sure that your milestones align with what your investors would want to look at? And I've also seen a lot of companies choose 1 or 2 ways. One is you do the long way, which is you apply for a ton of government grants. You go down the SBIR, STTR route, you spend a lot of money on a multi-decade project, or you go the faster way, which is by accessing private capital. And to me, it's become more acceptable for venture to look at these longer term time horizons, to be able to invest in companies that perhaps won't produce any returns or major milestones in the next 5 years. And it's about taking those moonshots. And I think there's been a switch up, and we were really hoping that for what is happening in the US with the grant ecosystem and how the government is a bit iffy with how much money is going into core science. We've got to figure out, is the private industry going to pick up the slack? Are the business models going to change? So that is all still up in the air. So if anyone's starting a company right now, they should be looking at the DoD ecosystem and the grant ecosystem as a buffer. That's not your business strategy. That is, that's a nice to have if you're lucky. So you have to figure out what are the milestones that can actually get you the revenue generation as fast as possible. Yeah, what to your perspective?
Yeah, no, I totally support that. I think if you start a company, your goal is not to die first, and of course generate revenues at some point, and you want to have a market, and especially if you're going to finance your company with venture capital, there are certain metrics you have to hit if you want to, be VC backable. So identifying the right opportunity and understanding if that fits with that particular funding scheme and fundraising scheme is important. There are other ways to finance a company, of course, that can be very well set up. But the grant game, it's not straightforward, right? Grants only fund a certain part of your development roadmap. They tend to change depending on how the interests shift in the funding institutions. So it is critical to identify something that gives you the stability and allows you to keep building your product and go after your opportunity regardless of that. In the case of Volta, I guess it was pretty much a mix of the things. What gave us confidence at the beginning was the fact that we could have support or recognition from NASA. We won the What's on the Moon Challenge back in 2021, but then we were able to make the case for a VC investment round. So we had our fundraise in 2022, and that was very important for us to be able to build our product according to the roadmap and go after the opportunity we had identified.
I want to ask one more question. I want to point back to you. So with the, you started out with the grant, and you have a ton of experience in this space. What do you think about all the startups that go for a grant that may not be perfectly aligned with their milestone, and then
I'm laughing because this literally happened to me today.
Oh no.
Okay, so there's a I won't mention the name of the company. There's an aerospace startup. Most people may have heard of it. They were wanting to do an STTR, but it's clear that they might not know exactly where their company's headed, but they want to throw lots of shots on goal. And STTRs are a way to throw shots on goal, in the sense that you might get a chunk of money to develop one potential payload, okay, for whatever your thing is. And so I'm kind of telegraphing here that this might be a company might be working on a spacecraft, right? So it's a way to take shots on goal, but as you said, at the end of the day, these little STTR small grants are not going to get you to where you need to go, but along the way you might pick up collaborators. You might pick up, okay, well, this is a small chunk of money, but now I've identified a person in an academic institution that can make a really good sensor, and that sensor might ultimately end up being folded into my product later.
So the granting process isn't so much about only like the financial benefits that you can get from it, but it's about like the potential partners that you can get from it, or like collaborations with different labs.
But you got to be intentional about that. You can't think you're gonna, small dollar way yourself to something big. You have to be strategic about these STTRs and what you're trying to get out of them.
Yeah, I think we had a lot of benefit from the projects we've pursued, especially when it came to building credibility in the eyes of our customers. It can be in some sense, especially in the early stages, of stamp of approval. If you can go to your customer or your investors and say, hey, NASA is actually funding this because they think there's value, that means something. And then you get the resources to build that. A lot of the sort of your ability to penetrate the market and to spread your product relies on how reliable you can prove that product to be. This is not a cost that you can pass on your customer. You either do that with your own capital or with government funding. So there can be a very good use for this investments, provided that you are very intentional and strategic.
Abhi, I wanted to pass this over to you. You do advise new startups as well through the accelerator at Berkeley. And so I'm curious what you might tell a new founder, especially within the space industry.
Sure. I think the number one piece of advice I would give is I see too many people that come to me with a pitch deck where it's obvious they don't really care what they're pitching. They just want to be a founder. Okay. And so my first piece of advice is you will fail if all you want to do is be a founder. Like, it's extremely evident to anyone that's a good investor or a good VC who actually passionately believes in the thing they're doing versus who just wants to be a founder or is just throwing something at the wall to get some money for, I don't know, a few months so they can claim that they founded a company. Like, and so I tell people you have to have like absolute conviction of what you are trying to pitch. And like the conviction needs to make sense. It needs to logically make sense, right? It can't just be blind conviction. So that's the first thing. The second thing is take good feedback and criticism. Don't you can tell a coachable founder versus a non-coachable founder right away, right? The non-coachable founder doesn't want to listen to what should be obvious in terms of feedback, whereas the coachable founder will be like, hey, do you mind having another call with me? Do you mind having another call with me, right? And I actually like the people that are like, okay, maybe I don't really know how to articulate my product. So those are the kind of things I look for in the ecosystem. I think for whatever reason, maybe it's the internet culture, I don't know why, people have this belief that it's just cool to be a founder, so maybe I should just be a founder for the hell of being a founder. And it's easy to see the difference between, like I said, a person that's really in it with all their heart versus someone that's just.
And I think, so that's sort of the founder side of things, but then if you look at it from the business side of things, how do you build a business that can be resilient to the shifting economic tides of the space industry right now? Yeah, I think, and maybe you two kind of touched on it, or maybe we talked about it in the back room over there, I can't remember, but you need to be real with yourself of when will you generate revenue. Now you could have a really incredible idea that, okay, you're not going to generate revenue for 5 years, but after 5 years you have the potential to have a $10 billion company or a $100 billion company. Investors will be patient with you if that's the case. But if it's very clear that your TAM is lower than that, but still venture backable, you have to be really clear with when you're going to start generating revenue and how. And that might mean it's not from your ultimate objective. It's because you figure out a way to unlock some revenue in a more modest silo before that. So yeah. Paolo, I know that you've got some experience with that. Do you want to talk about how Volta is approaching that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's definitely something interesting happening, I think, when it comes to government funding and the role that plays in the life of a startup and the ability of the startup to scale. I think it's important to identify what is, a wave versus what pertains more to an underlying trend in government posture. And for instance, if you look at the NASA budget over the years, it hasn't really changed a lot. ESA is slightly on the rise, Nyxara roughly constant. There's not a lot of civil institutional investments. But if you break that down, perhaps you see the lunar portion of that growing a little bit, and then you see the defense institutions having more interest into this lunar space, seeing as a domain for their action. And that in turn is driven by the strategic geopolitical needs right now, where the U.S. feels a strong competition from China, and other countries need or urged to develop their sovereignty in space. And these kind of things probably require sort of timelines that stretch over decades. And if you can build a strong, solid value proposition there, then you have a use case for a company. So that's a lot of how we think through that at the moment, and how we try to identify what are the drivers. There's despite of the fluctuations, there's probably a rising tide that we want to identify. where you can be just, a supplier for governments and privates alike. But governments are going to play a role, especially when it comes to energy of the moon.
So don't necessarily be dissuaded by the shifting, or like if it seems like the budgets aren't actually like rising, maybe there are spots within that if you dig deeper where you could take advantage of rising budgets, especially when it comes to lunar or it comes to like Martian development. Yeah. Gulmohar, I saw that you were really involved in Tech Week this week. And so I'm curious about how you've been unlocking collaboration within the space industry, especially out here in San Francisco or over in New York.
We were just talking about that as well. So we moved over from the East Coast to here. We're mid-move technically. So we wanted to make sure that we can get a lot of people who are interested in this space together at events. So we were hosting more deep tech, hardware emphasized events and trying to meet these people who were in this space, whether it was robotics, whether it was software that was utilized in space, or like we advanced manufacturing. So there's a ton of different facets in space tech that you can also utilize on Earth. So we were capitalizing on that. And there is a great ecosystem in LA. We can share that with them, and there are a fair few founders who are still in the Bay Area, and they are utilizing some advanced manufacturing capabilities here. It's not as easy to navigate as it is in El Segundo, for example. And New York, don't even go there if you're doing a space startup. That's a hot topic. And the Economic Development Association actually did this whole panel. They did this research study, and it was me and there was one other person who was both more West Coast based, and our answer was don't. Why every state does not have to be a space. It's not for banking. It's fine. It's okay. Just move on.
It's finances and AI only in New York.
Yeah, just do it. Double down on the strengths. Like, why are we splitting focus?
Yeah. How about you, Abhi? Unlocking collaboration. SSL was a lot of collaboration within the
I
industry.
mean, this is a hot topic for us at SSL. SSL is a university organization, and we all heard that the president's budget cut a bunch of science, right? I mean, it just cut it in half, not even by 10%, like literally half. So all of a sudden, the missions that we had planned to launch in 2027, 2030 are under threat. Now, might Congress eventually claw back the money as part of the negotiations? Maybe. But it was a little bit of a system shock to the university, such that we are even re-upping our efforts to engage aerospace startups. There's several that we talk to see if we can collaborate. Obviously, we're working with Rocket Lab on this Escapade mission, and I won't speak for them, but I think they've been pretty impressed by us. And quite frankly, our tools are more advanced than probably 95% of the aerospace companies out there. And so I think they're like, wow, we can work with the university because they do things as agile as we do and as fast as we do. So we want to make sure our university and our space sciences lab is putting it out there that, listen, we're ready to work with any company in order to further some joint goal. So that's one thing. The other big question, we have a brand new director. One of the questions she asked after starting 3 months ago, and this was a general question of the lab, so how do people feel about Space Force, DoD, right? This is a Berkeley lab, mind you, right? So, she wants to get the conversation started. And one way to broach that conversation is, listen, you want to make this cool sensor to study heliophysics, okay? But that same sensor with a slight variation could also be used for whatever DoD wants, like to image some, satellite in lunar orbit or other, that imaging a satellite in lunar orbit, by the way, is a real thing that they care about. So anyway, so I think we've had to have those conversations where this might be lean times. how can we make the best of those times while not offending the sensibilities of anyone who's worked at that lab for decades or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So in a time where maybe you can't rely on like government programs or like NASA programs, you're finding that there is success with leaning towards the private equity and startup space too.
And there's actually one more area, and you know, again, I think we touched on this in the room. So there, and I don't know if this is a good thing or not, so I will reserve judgment.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of extremely wealthy people that are suddenly interested in space, and those extremely wealthy people are like, well, shoot, I would love my name on that thing in space. And so that's all of a sudden a new revenue possibility where these very, and I kind of smile because this harkens back to the 1600s. Like, I think this is how, was it Copernicus? Or no, Kepler got his start with Tycho Brahe, right? And at that time there was a lot of rich people funding this basic science and stuff. And I almost feel like maybe we've returned to that era, and I reserve judgment of whether that's good or bad, but it's a thing. So yeah.
History really does keep repeating itself. So question to Paolo and Gulmohar about, do you find a need to like diversify your use cases of technology to keep it relevant and useful on Earth while aiming for your lunar and Martian applications? Like, do you need to have a Earth-based wedge in order to eventually get to your space-based goal?
Oh, we definitely do. Like, you're all in space. Like, I mean, the reason why we started the company was to look at, right, like we are obsessed with exploration and what we can do when we get off this planet. But there's no market right now in Mars or getting data back from the moon that's too tiny to be venture backable and also to be exciting to private capital, which is how we got funded. And you know, that wasn't our market, so that's not a market right now. So we had to figure out what are the problems that this space-based tech can solve for people on Earth. So we had to go through this whole ideas maze where you look at, right, we have this core piece of IP. Can it be utilized for transforming the communication systems on Earth? And me and my co-founder, we both have telecommunications and aerospace backgrounds, and so does the rest of the team. So it's very much leaning towards, are there applications right now in communication systems? Can we build better infrastructure? Can we build better internet services? And that's what we figured out over the past 2-ish years, was to nail down that business case. And we spent so much time at the National Science Foundation talking to customers. So it was a ton of customer discovery and collecting purchase order, you know, letters of intent before we even build anything. And like this is what I think a lot of engineers in this space try to overcomplicate and build something that is really cool and is the best tech in the world, but who cares if nobody's paying for it? And that's how we think about the tech. So what is the bare minimum that somebody is willing to accept and use right now? And that defined a lot of our parameters for what is the, you know, like our bit error rate, what should it be? What is the signal to noise ratio that people are okay with? It doesn't have to be telco grade, it has to be acceptable. So that's the key inside, is just, you've got to talk to the customers right now and be able to transform your milestones into these stepwise things that people have used. I would love to hear how you do that. Like, I think about that all the time. How you do it?
Me too. So when it comes to lunar power, you know, we started reasoning sort of in terms of, okay, if we believe that the humanity in the form of bigger nations across the globe wants to go to the moon and this time wants to go to stay, if we believe that this is true, then what are the capabilities that are required to enable that, and they're going to be sought after by all these people around the world. And so you figured out how to take off from Earth. You figure out, you know, 1 out of to attempt how to land on the lunar surface, but it's getting better. The next thing has to be power, and we're seeing this interest growing right now. And I'm not talking of mining the moon at industrial scale to extract metals, platinum group metals, or this so-called creep, potassium, etc., rare earths, and bring them back to Earth. None of that. There are applications that require power right now. I'm here working with Lucy-Night, which is a great example, but there are many others that are happening right now that require that power, those capabilities. Now that we can provide with very low cost. Very recently, NASA committed to this FSP, the efficient surface power. So establishing a nuclear reactor on the moon about 100 kilowatts, which is a lot of power, and that power needs to be distributed.
Yeah.
And you can do that with a very heavy cable that you will need to lay out on the moon, or you can do it with lasers, and that's how we try to come into play. So we see this traction right now, and of course there will be a time into the future where our full vision will take shape with a fully fledged constellation orbiting the moon, supplying global power with multiple users sharing the cost of that utility, essentially, just like any model. But there's something right now that supports that flywheel. That being said, that doesn't mean that we're blind to a good opportunity to use our technology on Earth, right? As a founder, we have to be extremely realistic, edge our risks and our bets. So long as that does not divert critical resources and mind space from our main path, our main goal, we try to build value proposition for use cases on Earth. One of the main ones we're looking into is drone charging. So you can drones have, I wouldn't say similar issues to a lunar lander, but they have a limited lifetime as well. Right now they fly with batteries when they're not powered by diesel engines, but that's outside of our sort of target. And those batteries give them about 30 to 60 minutes to stay in the air. After that, you need to land, perhaps swap the battery or recharge it, plug in. So you can remove that if you have a charging warrior in flight. And that's what we're looking into right now.
Can I ask, what about your pad systems? Because that would be so good if you were able to connect to the drones at how they're moving, and that's been a big challenge for any company.
It is. One of the things, so you mentioned PAD, I think it stands for Pointing Acquisition and Tracking, right? So it's something that you need, of course, if you want to charge a drone with a laser. If you're on a planet with an atmosphere, you're trying to charge a drone there, which is the only planet, right, a drone could fly into, right? Then you have to go through the atmosphere. So you have losses, you have beam divergence. It's not straightforward. A sort of much shorter term, quick and dirty solution is to tether the drone to an optical fiber, which is a lot lighter than a electric cable. So the drone doesn't need as much power to lift that mass, and you need even less power at that point to keep it in the air. And you don't need a pad system, you don't have losses. Of course, you have to deal with the tiny optical fiber, so there are limitations there as well. That is another opportunity that we're targeting with a little bit more focus.
From a leadership perspective, when you guys are working with these small teams, how do you balance approaching these immediate term revenue opportunities versus like your long-term goals of like lunar development? If you pull one person in order to work on one of these things, that means that you're pulling them off of like another thing. So I'm curious about like how you approach that type of problem. This could be to anyone who's interested.
I'll start based on observation.
Yeah.
I think too many companies discount the opportunity cost aspect of things, right? As you said, if you know what your number one milestone is, there's a temptation to, but there's this other little funding thing I can get if I just do this one-off thing for them.
Yeah.
And I can understand why that money or that possibility is tempting, but the best founders and the best companies that I see are laser focused and will only take that opportunity if they can credibly tell themselves that that opportunity lies on the path to their first milestone, their MVP, whatever it is. I've seen so many companies die by the paper cuts of, okay, let's get that money, and pretty soon you don't even know what the company really does anymore because all their best engineers are like doing 5 different things at once. So I mean, yeah, I don't know if you guys have seen that or what, but yeah, I definitely see that.
Yeah, no, I think focus is an extremely scarce resource as a founder, as a small team. So that's absolutely something you need to allocate very carefully. And so in our case, I think the first question is, okay, you have this, we have this vision of this large constellation around the moon where power is global. But, and of course, deploying that takes time, takes capital. And so the number one question is there a step along the road that allows us to get there but still happens at the moon and allows us to demonstrate the system, etc. So we're not trying from the get-go to be the base load power supply for anything that goes to the moon, to the point that people and payload builders and lander manufacturers can feel free to simply not have a battery because they're going to get power from Volta. There are shorter term applications that we can generate revenue from and that are on the path that we can pursue right now. We can be your partner to slightly extend your life into the lunar night or get you through one lunar night. We can be your partner if you want to reduce a little bit of your battery mass, not completely, but shave off those 10 kilograms that save you $10 million, and you can allocate to another revenue generating payload, for instance, for your customer. Or we can be a backup option. So if you have a failure with your power system, which happens often, then we can help you with that. So this is the number one thing to ask. And if the answer is no, then you probably have a problem, right? So that's how we're looking at that.
Yeah, and we're a small team, so we don't have capacity to not do the things that don't make sense right now. I do know of very close friends who have been building out their space companies for a couple years, and they have taken up a grant because it was milestone 2, and now because it was milestone 2, it's led to some messy development because over time things have changed and the second milestone doesn't really make sense anymore, but the way the government grants are dispersed, you want to use every single dollar, and so they spent all this time building something that's not really useful anymore. So
Yeah.
it's very common.
Actually, let me give you one more anecdote from at the very opposite end. Let's talk about really mature companies. Okay, let's contrast two different approaches. I'm going to contrast as an example of this question, SpaceX and Rocket Lab. Okay, so years ago, I went to the very top of SpaceX, and I said, hey, listen, we make amazing star trackers. Why don't we sell them? Okay, lots of people we call them star trekkers, even though generically they're star trackers, right? And the answer I got was, do you really want our company to be IT support for all these other companies that are going to use our star trackers? That directly takes away, that's an opportunity cost, that directly takes away from us putting a settlement on Mars. Now, as another example, you have Rocket Lab. Rocket Lab is getting into the business of selling components, right? So I think what I'm getting at is we have two examples, and long term we'll see which thesis works. Do they both work? If they both work, how did they both end up working? But I wanted to just give an example of why you may want to pass up an opportunity that's going to be an opportunity cost and will distract you from your main thing. So,
Actually, a very famous company that filed for bankruptcy earlier this year and got acquired, a satellite-based company, and one of the many reasons for the failure was because they took on so many government contracts that they couldn't service, and that's a problem. And it's also, you see companies like I'm trying trying to name names, are the ones who try to build out every single component in their ecosystem as a tiny pre-seed company with maybe 5 or 6 million. Why are you doing that? Just partner with people, buy things, COTS components. There are so many options. You don't have to build the whole system end to end. Once you get in the game of doing that, then suddenly, instead of solving your core engineering challenge, you've created 10 more, and then you're going to solve the 10 more with basically no money.
Yeah, vertical integration is easier when you've got a lot of money to pull from.
Yeah.
I'm curious about how investors can distinguish hype from high opportunity or high impact opportunity. And Abhi, this question is for you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, there's a lot of really, really not well experienced in this domain investors. I mean, I see so many investors where I'm just like, you gave money to what, right? Because they, and I don't know if it's like, they don't care because they're spray and pray, I don't know. But the ones that are actually thoughtful and know what they're talking about, they actually have a list and go down to try to figure out. And honestly, at the seed level, it's really about, it's only half about the tech. Mostly it's about, why do I trust this founder? Why do I trust this person? What about them is exuding not only conviction, but the fact that they're actually competent. And I think this is dying down now, but a couple years ago, everyone's like, space company, here you go, here's money, right? And I think we're past that now a little bit. Well, we are past it, but then now Golden Dome came out, so I don't know. Maybe we're back in it. We'll see. But
What is Golden Dome?
Oh, Golden Dome is the whole DoD thing where they want, basically a dome around the Earth, being able to spy on other satellites with lasers knocking down things. I mean, nobody really knows the full extent of what Golden Dome is, but they know it's trillions. Yeah, it's just exactly. So I think that might create another cycle of, well, if you say the word Golden Dome, maybe a VC will give you money. I don't know.
So the number of times we've been asked, so how would you fit in the Golden Dome?
Yeah.
Because it's so well defined, right? That we could totally fit it.
Yeah, and being lasers companies, it's got to be the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, but both these companies would be attractive.
We're doing the same thing to most investors. There is no difference, and there was also this point of investors not being educated. We have this discussion so much in Princeton with all the very, very nerdy people, because it's very often that you see venture funds come to the department and they ask for expertise in a particular area that they think that this academic is aligned with, but they're not, by the way. It's a total mismatch. And we talked about this for a while, about decentralizing how diligence is done for really deep tech, capital intensive investments, because at that point, you're not playing with, even 100K or so, it's suddenly in the millions. So the diligence needs to be on par with it. It's almost like you need a peer review process to be able to judge, is this feasible? And what does the technology look like long term? And it has to be people who know what they're talking about, but also they also need to be hidden from who is making this judgment. It literally has to be like a scientific peer review process, and we talked about doing it on blockchain at one point. I was at a venture fund, and then we had this very serious discussion. What if you could get all that data from academic institutions, their Google Scholar, whatever research page, align that, and with new models, you probably could align it pretty well, right? And on the blockchain, you could verify someone's identity, their credentials without verifying their identity. And if you get 6 of those, very highly esteemed experts in the field saying, well, it's kind of feasible, then there probably is. So that makes it easy to probably do diligence for someone who isn't technical enough. So I would love to know what you think of that, because this was such a crazy offshoot.
Yeah.
And we thought, isn't that whatever happened?
Yeah, no, in general, if at a seed level or a pre-seed or a seed, you'd be surprised at what the first thing I do is. The very first thing I do is when I see a pitch deck, I go straight to the team and then I go to their LinkedIn. And if it doesn't say this company's name on their LinkedIn as the top line, I automatically know like this isn't even their main thing. It's like their side thing maybe, right? So that's one filter. But yeah, it's like you're saying, like you have to have somebody that actually understands the technology in order to be able to invest with good conscience in that thing. And people don't always have that, and sometimes they do the opposite, which is also bad, which is, oh yeah, of course we have a scientist or an engineer, and it's some really, really senior scientist and engineer with a lot of experience, but they might be completely divorced from the newest in the field. And so now you've got your scientist and engineer to help the VC, but you've got the wrong scientist or engineer, and it's just as bad, right? So, and the last thing I'll say about that is our industry is so small that you can easily call up someone within 1 to 2 degrees of separation to vet that founder. Someone else has worked with that founder before, or someone else has worked with the CTO of that team before, and get a really good feel for, yeah, this person was a really top person at whatever they were at before, or I've worked with this person, I vouch for them, they have really good energy, they're a good people manager, because you could be a very technical founder, but maybe you're not a good people person. And then if you come and you're a solo founder and you're like, hey, I'm great, but I don't have a co-founder who might be the people person, if you're not, right? We look for that kind of thing too. And there's a lot of obvious like red flags, I think, that in cycles where everyone's just throwing around money, they ignore all those red flags. So, yeah.
So I know that we're approaching sort of like the last 15 minutes of this. I wanted to ask you guys one more question and then open it to like any questions from the audience. So the final question is, what is inspiring you today?
Wow. So I'm reading the first volume of the Mars trilogy. I don't know if you read that.
Okay, sorry.
It's a very nice and inspiring book. That's a very inspiring thing, I think, the fact that we're living at a time where the ingenuity and the things that we can build and craft can take us so far. That to me is extremely empowering and inspiring. It inspires me to be able to work every day with an incredible team of people, which I learn from constantly. And so knowing that there are incredible things that can be done and that there are people who are willing to really do those things with you, that's what inspires me.
I mean, I think, as I said at the beginning, we launched a spacecraft 2 weeks ago, which as of today is 1 million miles from Earth.
Congratulations.
Yeah, and then we're launching in 4 weeks again. And so I'm inspired just by it being a really good 2 or 3 months here for me and my team, and it's easy to actually the last time I was in mission control for a launch, or rather for a payload that I cared about, was the Crew Demo 2 mission that SpaceX did in 2020, and that was separated from an F9. And then 2 weeks ago, went to see the mission I'm on now, Crothers, separate from the F9. I'm like, hey, I missed this feeling. It's good to have this feeling again of watching my spacecraft separate from an F9.
Were you in Florida or were you in California for that one?
No, I was in MCCX in California. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
Wait for the demo
For
2?
demo 2.
Yeah.
Wow. I watched that one from Florida.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Amazing. And then how about you?
I've just seen recently little pockets of people that are organizing themselves because they care so much about science, and this has been new. There was a period where it was quite stagnant, and suddenly it's this opposition to this country stop caring about science as like a big blanket statement, and now it's almost like the nerds are fighting back, and there's like,
I want on a t-shirt.
Yeah, totally.
like, we're doing it, and And it's a lot of that, and I see overall as a trend, you see tech companies used to have non-technical CEOs, which is bizarre to me. Like that should not happen. And over time, that has corrected itself. And now you cannot be a founder in this space if you don't have a technical background. And you shouldn't, because it's really, really hard. You shouldn't even think about it. And go get a PhD if you really want to do something like that. And you know, most people won't do it. You have to spend time doing the deep work. And I really like that it's a little win, and you see a lot more people coming out of academia being able to, you know, very quickly people are able to learn what it takes to sell, what it takes to be a good business person. And people used to laugh, and you know, people coming out of academia, like, they still do probably. You're too nerdy, like you. I'm like, that's easy to learn. It's they already did the hard work, which most people won't be able to do. So the barrier to entry is so high, and I think people are learning that my skill set is so worth it, and all the other stuff is learnable. So it really feels like the nerds are really fighting back.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, you guys can get merch after this for now out there. Yeah, okay, let's open it to questions. I'll start with you.
Funny thing, I barely finished my bachelor's from a school in Mexico, so it's kind of funny you say that, but I agree with you, definitely you need to be an expert.
I said PhD, that may fix that. It was about people who are building. Like
Yeah.
you can, it's not about like formal schooling.
Yeah.
Like you have to be like a Rocket Lab, like he's not formally educated.
Yeah.
Is he technical? Yes, very. Like he's a scientist by every measure.
I love
So
it.
it is about that.
Yeah. But jumping into the question, I raised money from A16C, and now a lot of my friends is busy season. They're reaching out to me, and I really want to support people that are from diverse backgrounds into, getting those millions and doing great. But I keep seeing that people just think very incrementally, and it's surprising because I keep saying, like, I'm now on the other side. I know, like, hey, you're investing in the technology, something radically different. You're investing on the people that are extremely talented and for whatever reason they don't know it, or something that is gonna get them a huge mold. Why are we not teaching this to entrepreneurs? Like right now, it seems like, oh, just slap something on top of something and that's innovation, and it's not. It never been. And I'm trying really not to say the A word, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. Do you want to?
So if I understood correctly your question, let me rephrase for a second.
Yeah.
You're asking, why don't we teach
Innovation.
people how to have, like disruptive ideas, and not just incrementally sort of improving? Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think there is some literature on the topic. I think it's something that is studied. To my knowledge, somebody maybe tries to teach that. I just think it's very hard, and there is some sort of, getting something disruptive to market. The statistics there let you think that there are not so many people that really understand it, so only the few who really understand that are able to make it. But in reality, even if, I guess my interpretation of that is, even if billions of people know that, just the execution and the hardships, it's such a big filter that it prevents that sort of knowledge that can be taught from transforming into.
Yeah, I have a slightly weird answer to this question, okay?
Oh.
I feel part of it is that people don't read enough anymore. And I don't mean read tech stuff. I mean read novels and read science fiction books. Just read. There's so, I think I heard this once and I'll never forget it, is that if you want to be a tech founder and you just can't come up with an idea, every potential tech company that could possibly exist in the next 100 years has already been written about in some sci-fi novel. So just go read science fiction books until you're like, that sounds good, and then you start. Because people don't think big enough, because a lot of people have stopped reading as much, especially in the younger generation. So I don't know, it's a weird answer, but that's what I think is part of it. So
That's another t-shirt. Read more sci-fi.
I mean, Asimov thought about the L-lines way before they called multipacks, so.
Well, I had related. I was also going to add that by the nature of the word, about it has to be disruptive, right? And not everyone can be disruptive. And if everyone was coming up with these ideas, who's going to actually sit down and do the work to make it happen? That's also what I think about. It kind of falls in the natural order of things. Like, you come up with someone who can execute it, they'll come up with a disruptive idea, and then there's a ton of people like, oh, I can get behind that. I don't have to come up with my own ideas. I'll support this one. So there's a bit of that as well. But people need to read more. That's
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I started reading again, it's been huge.
yeah.
So I was wondering if you have any have seen or have any experience or just have some words for this younger generation that is growing up with the space world lending itself more to the Department of War than any application towards greater human aspiration, technological innovation, or discovery. And I personally think that people won't try to be astronautical engineers. People won't try to be planetary scientists because they see that it's not possible, or it's only possible through creating technologies, through creating weapons.
yes for you.
Yeah, I mean, I have, let me give you an anecdote. You know, I recently went to speak at a summer camp at the Lawrence Hall of Science, which is literally down a staircase from my lab. And Lawrence Hall of Science, if you're not familiar, is a kind of a kids museum in Berkeley, right? And what they were learning at camp that week was, these were 7th graders, okay? They were learning CubeSat design, or some, you know, very simple, how do you design a satellite, right? So I went in there and I gave them a lecture on this Carruthers mission, the one that launched 2 weeks ago. And then I learned from the camp counselor that they were going to design a satellite by the end of the week, right? And so I'm like, oh man, I'm so curious. What kind of satellite are they going to design? Is it going to be a Mars mission? Is it going to be a lunar thing, looking for black holes, right? And the answer came back, well, they're looking to make a satellite that's going to get rid of space debris. And my body just sank, okay? And the reason it sank is because we need to teach the next generation to be optimists. Don't think of everything being bad. Don't think of, oh my God, am I gonna make weapons? Because you don't wanna work on that kind of stuff. So ask yourself, if I don't wanna work on that stuff, I can make it happen that I don't have to work on that stuff. And the reason that space debris thing bothered me so much is that space debris is not a problem yet, okay? It might eventually be a problem, but the extent to which it is overhyped right now kills me, because you have little kids worried about space debris instead of worrying about finding how black holes form and such, right?
Yeah.
So I think we really need to put out more, like, forget about the weapons and stuff. Work on the cool shit you want to work on, and I feel like that energy will inspire the next generation to like actually work on that kind of stuff.
So it will exist if they build it.
Exactly, like, and it really comes down to a simple piece of advice is, like, we need more optimism, right? Optimism is the thing that will make us not have to work on weapons if we don't have to work on weapons, right? So.
That said, you made me think about this. In the Golden Dome, right, we don't really understand what it is because there isn't any clear definition for what it is, but it seems to be a commitment from the government to significantly support the new space economy in its ability to deploy assets into space in order to be able to do any and all kinds of missions, right? One of the things that you need for any sort of wartime operation is the same things you need for any sort of civilian operation. And so just like how maybe in centuries past, you had, navies funded by militaries, they also promoted trade. And so the question is now, how do the parts of the government which are previously dedicated towards civilian missions now support the space economy through this more Department of War type lens. For example, JPL, we recently spoke to them, and they're trying to figure out how to leverage the smaller amount of resources, but to continue to push space forward. And there's this big transition, right? Lots of people getting fired from JPL. At the same time, Space Force is getting is hiring. So like, how does that transition happen? How does the greater market align companies? Like, almost, I'm not sure. I don't have a fully formed question, but it feels like the grains inside of a piece of metal are like aligning. There's a magnetic field, the pole is shifting. How do you each individually feel that shifting of that, of those, you know, pieces of the field, of the force? How would
there's a ton of books about what would be an alternate history if we never de-escalated the moon race, and if Russia won the moon race. And what that would mean, there would have been more investment into the DoD, there would have been more great tech that would have resulted through this process, because that's kind of how we found, you know, GPS, or like better navigational capabilities. There's so much good tech that has come out of you know, efforts that were made to advance the DoD, and I think long term that's something that could happen. And to your point, if everyone doesn't want to be a part of, you know, war efforts, like that's also a significant barrier. I felt that when we were looking at our tech, when you had to be a dual use company because you're space. So we actively looked at what are the different use cases that have combined bigger TAMs than the DoD ever would. What is so big that we could just completely bypass DoD, and you can think of those things. And right now, of course, we leverage government grants. That's great, and the government will always buy from you if you have that commercial use case. But if you want to focus on that, then build the business cases around it. Like, think more creatively. Like that's always an option in that space. Think about how do you de-risk things, make it more enterprise level of what do people want right now. And that means that maybe you need to not think of, oh, I wanted to go to space, like I'm building something for Amazon now. It makes no sense. You know, it's yeah, that's. But what does that do? That gives you some milestones, that gives you revenue to not have to go down a DoD path at times. But also, even if you have to, like my long-term view is we need to accelerate it, and we need to do more of that. We need to do more acceleration, because if you don't provide like a DoD contract, somebody else will fill it, right? Like it's still going to be there. So unless we're like just completely cutting out the DoD, like there's someone who's going to fill that contract, and it might as well be you. So that's been like an opposing force that I've thought about a lot.
Even the internet, right? Also
Yeah.
DoD, everything around us.
Yep.
So I just thought of something that touches on both your questions, okay? So a couple months ago, I wrote a white paper, mostly just for myself, but I talked to folks at both NASA and the SDA about it, so civilian and military. So my idea was have the government block buy a set of buses, spacecraft buses of 4 different sizes. Giant buses that are the width of a starship, okay? And then ones that are the width of a New Glenn or a F9, ones that are the width of an Electron, whatever, right? Now, the reason for this, and this gets into like, how do we be optimistic and not work on, right? All I cared about is I want NASA to do multiple flagship missions a year, not one a decade, okay? I want them to do like a dozen Discovery class missions every year, not one every 5 years. Now, the only way NASA could do that is if the bus is cheap, because right now every spacecraft bus they buy is bespoke, and that's why the Hubble and James Webb is 10 billion, right? Now, they're never gonna get that bus price down unless there's another customer that's willing to help the block buy. Now, who's another customer that might want a giant bus a large bus, a medium bus, a small bus, okay? And all of a sudden now all these commercial companies, whether they be Rocket Lab or Astranis, which is in the Bay Area, K2, Loft, whatever, now they're like, oh, we're gonna pivot our attention to this. This is a block buy customer. So it's kind of a win-win for everyone. It's a win for the scientists who want to do discovery class missions like I want to do. It's a win for the military that now has a cheaper bus to do whatever the heck they want to do. You know, it's a win for commercial companies also, because now they have a cheap bus to do their product, whatever their payload is. So I think there's a path to like tell that aerospace engineer or scientist or whatever, look, there is something you can work on, but we just got to figure out a convergence point so that everyone wins instead of, you know, a zero-sum game. So
Yeah, if I can add quickly,
Yeah.
super quickly.
So sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. I think to your point, there's an argument to be made that, you know, competition might spark more innovation and might create this situations where people from different, you know, spheres of society can join forces towards, you know, a goal that meets their sort of objectives at the same time. For instance, Volta right now is working for the US DoD, under contract for the US DoD, but what we built for them is also extremely relevant to the space agencies, the Canadian Space Agency, for instance, that can leverage that for exploration purposes. So that's a good synergy. And last bit, I also wanted to bring up Open Lunar because I think that organizations like Open Lunar can play a good role here, you know, in stimulating that good conversation, that sort of search for common ground that allow people to start communicate, share data, and in many occasions, this can be what prevents, you know, escalation and you know, the regeneration of things into very sort of bad scenarios, if you will. So it's good that things like Open Lunar exist, and that's a way in which we can be active and support this.
You will be the last question.
Okay.
Awesome.
No
And-
pressure.
No pressure. No pressure.
And then after that, that's it.
That's
And
it.
then I'll say goodbye. Okay. So now we all know what's happening next. Please.
All right. Final question. No,
No
pressure at all. No
Yeah.
pressure at all. So since this is going to be the final question, just a quick point to the people that are talk to school groups. I talked to a lot of school groups. I talked to a lot of folks. There's a lot of narrative around space is now military. Space is non-military. Space is not only military. There's so much more to do in space. We all know there needs to be space lawyers, there needs to be space doctors, there needs to be space artists, space calisthenics directors. If we're serious about multi-planetary species, you need everyone. That is not a question, that's just for the people that are talking to young folks. Because kids want to do all kinds of stuff. They don't want to just be military. But to the question. I'm curious about how each of you deal with the fact that we're looking towards a multipolar space industry pretty soon in terms of China's got very serious plans for the lunar surface. You know, Russia, India, Japan. Just curious about, okay, if this is I forget the latest numbers for when China wants to have an established lunar presence. It's in like 2 or 3 years. How does that change the way you folks work, or how does that change how we all approach this industry? So.
I think it gets it back to the competition. I was basically touching on that. It's the escalation. Suddenly, everyone's interested in putting things on the moon because 6 other countries are also interested, and that can be a good thing in many ways, you know, and it can also be a bad thing if you think of it as it's getting more militarized. But what that has done is, you know, for us, like we think that okay, well we want to build things for comms on Earth, and like I actively tell people like sure, like we'll serve these defense contracts, but there's a bigger market, and now there's funding to be able to do that, so that's really exciting. And to me, there's going to be more and more people who are developing more and more technologies that can be built in a shorter time frame because every time in history when we have thrown money at something like that and there's been a sense of urgency, we've been able to do great things, whether it was get to the moon in the first place or build out the COVID vaccine, or there's just countless examples. And it wasn't that we couldn't have done it before, but because there was no urgency, we never even tried, and now there's an urgency. So I'm excited about the kind of innovation that's going to come out of that.
Well, I guess for us, having more activity on the moon is great. Of course, we don't want that activity to be destructive in any sense or, belligerent, of course. But the fact that many nations have an interest doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to escalate into something wrong or bad, right? We have analogies like Antarctica or many other situations where the interest of multiple nations for a single spot led to some dialogue and the ability to do more together. What I was learning when I was working on power standards for the moon was an analogy about power standards on Earth. You had standards, growing geographically, right? You had the US developing their own standards first, and then you had the Association of the German Electronic Engineers doing their own standards. So you had this sort of, nuclei of standards growing independently from each other. But when they grew large enough and when conditions allowed, those community and bubbles started to merge and interact. And that's how you had ISO right now, the International Standard Organization, and you have people, talking on a common plane. I think that so far only confirms that at least Volta made the right sort of bet, believing that power on the moon is the next capability that's required, and hopefully that's going to enable a lot of exciting and peaceful purposes there.
I'll keep my answer pretty short. I think competition is good in the near term. The one thing I always note that in all the science fiction novels, you end up having cooperation between like Russia and China and all that, right? And I will admit I'm jaded by that now. I don't believe it'll happen, but for a very weird reason. Not because people are at war or anything like that, but because I have good experience knowing that bureaucracies with their standards don't tend to play well with each other. Let me give you an example of Europe. ESA can't make a basic rocket anymore because all the countries fight with each other over standards and what work gets done where. So I'm like really surprised. This is the one area I'm pessimistic on, that how can we cooperate unless we get rid of more regulation between nations and nations. So anyway.
I'm glad to. I'll give my answer. I didn't give not one answer this whole time, so I'll give my answer. But I think a lot of people who are building these things tend to be people like us, and though it's being managed by people who want power, generally people like us aren't that inclined to be in conflict with each other. We want to see each other succeed too. So when there's an anomaly at a different company, we look at that as space engineers and we say, damn, we wish that could have gone better for them too. So hopefully things converge towards peace, converge towards collaboration. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you to our panelists for being here and for giving your insights and opinions and sharing about your experiences. This was an amazing panel. So just thank you everyone. And,
Thanks for organizing.
Go in peace. Help yourself to any food refreshments out there. Ask questions. Mingle a little bit. No yelling. No yelling anymore. But aside from that.
Hey,